As we continue our discussion of invertebrates, we want to start into the worms. Why are we going in the worm direction next? Well, we want to think about the difference between body cavities. And what I want to look at is the idea that our three different worm types, flatworms, roundworms, and your basic earthworms, all have three different types of body cavities. We've talked about these before. If you don't remember, you can go back to the animal characteristics and look at the body cavities. But briefly, we want to start with the flatworms, also known as Platyhelminthes, because they have no internal body cavity. You see here they have three body layers. Okay, they have ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, meaning that they will be triploblasts. But you see there's no opening, right? When we talk about our roundworms and our earthworms later, they have open spaces inside. Flatworms are flat for a reason. They have no body cavity. Most of the time, we look at these flatworms as being pretty gross, frankly, right? Two of the three classes are actually parasites, so we worry about infection from them and them taking up residence inside of us, like tapeworms and flukes and so on. But we have here no coelom. Remember, that means no body cavity. They do have a digestive tract. They're a normal animal, okay? But they are starting to have more digestive features than some of our other invertebrates that we've already talked about. But it is not a complete digestive tract. We'll see that. There's no blood circulation per se. They're flat, so they just exchange gases through their skin, whatever they need to do that way. And the distribution of nutrients and so on throughout this organism are fairly basic because there's no cavity, there's no internal separation. It just kind of flows from point to point. So when we look at our gastrovascular cavity in our flatworm, the one that we study a lot is something known as a planaria. So this flatworm, you see the gastrovascular cavity is all throughout its body. It has a single opening, labeled here as its mouth, but this is also where any waste would be expelled as well. It also just expels waste through its skin as needed if the particles are small enough. So on this organism, we actually look at them as having something known as external digestion, much like a fungus, and we'll get into that. Also notice we have eyes all of a sudden. Now these are very basic eyes. They would be composed only of rods, so black and white vision, and it would be very simple movement type of idea, so essentially looking for shadows, not focusing on anything. These are certainly not visual predators in any way. And a slightly more complex nerve structure because it's added eyes. Flukes also fall into this category, as do tapeworms, all of them, of course, being parasitic. So we worry about infections, particularly from water supplies and food supplies with these sorts of organisms. The tapeworm itself gets into your small intestine typically and hangs out, right, and reproduces. So it's actually reproducing through these little tiny segments or parts of itself, in which we would actually find inside each one of these a new embryo. So this is how they reproduce. They make more pieces of themselves that break off, move out of your body through the waste, and are picked up typically through contaminated water supplies, and then eaten by another organism usually, and can get into the muscle tissue of these organisms, form things known as cysts, or essentially little hard pockets inside the muscle tissue, making it, of course, very painful to be infected by these. And what we worry about is in undercooked meat, these cysts actually survive, and you ingest them and they start the cycle all over again. These organisms are important when we look at ecosystems because they actually need two hosts to complete their life cycle. Same with your dog. When we talk about dogs and tapeworms, we don't look necessarily at them eating undercooked meat as much. Now, of course, many dogs have a raw diet, but when we look, normally we actually look at fleas as being the intermediate for the tapeworm life cycle in dogs, otherwise acting exactly the same way as pigs and humans. The flatworm, or the planaria that we mentioned, this is a specific one, actually feeds on dead things most of the time, but is not beyond feeding on something that is still alive. So it attaches itself, as it has here, to our snail, and it expels digestive enzymes like our fungus. So when those digestive enzymes are excreted, they will start to digest, and then the worm simply reabsorbs what's been digested on the outside. So we would put them on the category of absorptive heterotroph, just like the fungus. We do look reproductively at most of them as being hermaphroditic. They don't come into contact with each other very often. Remember, that was an important characteristic in reproduction. So having both male and female reproductive structures is important. We've already talked about the fact that they are triploblastic, meaning that they have a mesoderm, ectoderm, and endoderm.